everybody, to this Steel Talk. My name is Jorge Murat. I am the director of Steel University. Just some word about the Steel University is the education and training program of World Steel Association, with the main objective to deliver training for the young professionals, and also students at the university level in around the world. Also for workers in the steel industry and the value chain. And due to that, World Steel is an association of steel companies, research center, and regional association around the world. We comply with the antitrust law, so we will not participate in any discussion that does not comply with this regulation. Therefore, when we have our Q&A session at the end of the presentation, we will not include those questions that could put us against this law. This presentation is delivered on the framework of a cooperation program between companies, associations, universities, and research centers to support the education and training of workers and students of the steel industry. The steel industry has been operating under unusual and uncertain and volatile conditions for the last decade. Increasing pressure from the environmental regulation and also disruptive technologies are transforming the industry. Also, the COVID-19 pandemic have reinforced and accelerated many of these continued changes. Therefore, World Steel carried out a 1.5 year study to develop a deeper understanding of the macro megatrends. The result of the industry-specific consequences also are analyzed on this study. Today, I am glad to introduce Dr. Baris Çiftçi. He is a director of the industry analysis at World Steel, and he will present the main finding of this study and how they are expecting this to shape shape the global socio-economic landscape and also the future of steel using sector and the global steel industry. Just some word about Baris and his great experience. Baris received a Bachelor of Science degree in the Industrial Engineering from the Middle East Technical University in Turkey, and also had received a PhD degree in Economics from the Tilburg University in Netherlands. And he is currently responsible of leading the association research activity on raw material markets and also of identifying the most pressing issues along the steel value chains, from raw materials and energy market to steel and to steel consumption industries such as automotive and construction. I hope that all of you enjoyed this presentation. Before to give the floor to Baris, let me remember to you that this presentation is recorded, and this version of the recording will be available into the Steel University website next week. And also, if you have your company want to have a recording version of this webinar, we can embed this into your learning management system as well to share inside of your company. Also, let me remember that at the end of the presentation, we will have a Q&A session, and we will receive your questions through the Q&A tool that is in Zoom, and we will curate the questions and have this discussion at the end with Baris. I hope you enjoyed this. Without further ado, Baris, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jorge. Thank you very much to the whole Steel Talks team, Scott and Sebastian too, for the kind introduction, and also especially for giving me the opportunity to share our main findings on this very important topic, megatrends, and how they are likely to shape the future of our industry. I'm very happy to see the very wide participation from different parts of the world. I think it is indeed a reflection of how this topic, megatrends, became popular recently, especially with the pandemics. Everyone could observe that the changes we've been observing for some time have accelerated. I think this really contributed to the increasing popularity of this discussion. So, of course, everyone has this question. So where are we headed? What is the direction we are going? What kind of a world we might expect to see in 10 years from now or 15 years from now? Because these changes we are observing seem to be quite different than what we used to experience before. So actually, this is the motivation of this study. As Jorge explained, one of my main responsibilities at worldsteel, which we call strategic initiatives area, aims at identifying the most pressing issues for our industry and conducting studies on such issues so that we can provide our membership with the necessary and timely intelligence and insight on these issues. And for the last 18 months, starting from the more intensive days of the pandemic, this strategic initiatives activities focused on this topic, megatrends. How megatrends are likely to change the socioeconomic landscape of the world and the geopolitical landscape of the world, and thereby also what are the impacts they will going to have in the future of the global steel industry and steel using sectors such as automotive and construction. So today I will be sharing the main findings, a summary of the main findings coming from this study with the participants of this call. So let me show my presentation, share my screen first. Great, so let's start. I'll immediately move on to the fourth slide that provides the agenda of my speech today. I'll start with an overview of megatrends and then consider their influence on the global socioeconomic and geopolitical landscape. Then we will consider together how these megatrends and how they change the global socioeconomic and geopolitical landscape will be shaping the future of urban areas, the future of mobility, and the future of two main steel using sectors, construction and automotive. And finally, we're going to consider the question under the light of the findings we have on megatrends and how they are likely to shape the global socioeconomic and geopolitical landscape. What should be the vision for the global steel industry and what should be the agenda for the global steel industry? So that will be the concluding part of my speech today. But before I start, I'd like to thank our member companies that participated in this project and their representatives that participated in this project for their invaluable support. And as you can see on your screens, these member companies were Çolakoğlu, Erdemir, Gerdau, POSCO, and Tata Steel. So let's start. A quick overview of megatrends. So what are megatrends? On your screens, you can see the three criteria that should be satisfied by a trend so that we can call it a megatrend. And these three criteria are being long-term, having broad scope, and having a major impact. That is, megatrends should be sustained over at least several decades, and they should result in fundamental changes worldwide on the way we work and live, on our priorities and preferences, on the industrial order, the political order, the geopolitical order, and hence the governmental priorities too. So which megatrends can we identify by using this criteria? And how can we categorize them? This is the question we try to address in the next slide. And here you can see the 5 megatrends categories we have identified and considered in our study on megatrends. Starting from the right-hand side, the first megatrends category is the demographic and social changes category. Here we consider some very well-known megatrends such as continued population growth, population aging, and expansion of global middle class. The second megatrends category is urbanization, which is also a well-known megatrend. The third one is the climate change and environment-related megatrends. Here we consider the trends driven by increasing environmental pressures and increasing environmental consciousness at individual, social, corporate, and governmental levels. We observe that increasing environmental pressures and increasing environmental consciousness are driving a reformation of the global socioeconomic order. This process is also known as the green transition of the world. The fourth megatrends category we consider is the global economic and geopolitical shifts category. And here we consider several megatrends that we have observed for the last 3 to 4 decades, such as globalization, shift of economic and technological innovation power from developed to developing countries, shrinking role of states in economies, and the growing role of finance sector in the global economy. And the last megatrends category is the very well-known technological progress category. And you can see that we placed it in the middle of all these megatrends categories because technological progress has always been the main transformative force in history. Also, in different periods of time, we see that different megatrends join the technological progress as a major transformative force. For example, for the 20th century, urbanization was clearly one of the main transformative forces. And for the 21st century, it seems the green transition of the world will be one of the two main transformative forces together with technological progress. And as these two great forces, green transition and technological progress, transform the global socioeconomic and geopolitical landscapes, we see major countries, major economies of the world recognizing this transformation and devising new development visions, economic, geopolitical strategies to govern this transformation. We observe that some key policy documents that are recently released, such as the European Green Deal, the infrastructure plan in the US, and policies which we can call as harmonious coexistence between human and nature in China, share a very broad base. They all laid out a set of climate, economic, and social goals to build a sustainable and resilient new life. That is, they point to achieving long-term sustainability as the new vision, and they also aim at ensuring resilience to the rising volatility, uncertainty, and new factors such as climate change, changing geopolitical conditions that the transformation brings about. So let's consider what kind of environmental actions and vision we see in these documents. Well, we observe that decarbonization lies at the heart of environmental vision for all of these major economies of the world. These policy documents all laid out detailed action plans with ambitious decarbonization targets. We also see these documents provide detailed roadmaps to address climate change adaptation needs, boost the efficient use of resources, and restore biodiversity and cut pollution. And when we turn to the economical vision described in these, described in these policy documents, we see that major economies, all major economies of the world, have a major focus on infrastructure, investments in clean energy, and other parts of enabling infrastructure for green transition, such as hydrogen infrastructure and carbon capture infrastructure, and also breakthrough technologies too. We also see action plans to incentivize the development of strategic sectors that are key to the leadership of the new green and smart era: electric vehicles, battery technology, and semiconductors. We also see policies being devised to ensure the secure supply of those materials and components that are assessed as strategic or critical. Next, let's have a closer look at the green transition. So what is the scale of the challenge we are facing? This slide shows the International Energy Agency's Sustainable Development Scenario projection, the orange line you can see on this chart, for global energy-related carbon dioxide emissions. This projection is in line with the Paris Agreement objective of limiting the increase in global average temperature to well below 2 centigrade degrees. And we see that the Paris Agreement requires bringing down the global energy-related carbon dioxide emissions to less than 10 billion tons by 2050 from more than 35 billion tons in 2019. And this has to be realized while the global population continues to grow and probably while the global economy continues to grow too. Such a big challenge cannot be met without a complete green transformation of world's basic infrastructure and basic economic systems, such as the energy infrastructure, mobility systems, and buildings. And on this slide, I try to provide two examples that clearly show the scale and pace of the transformation necessary to meet the Paris Agreement objective. The green bars below show the average annual renewable energy generation capacity additions. The top green bar shows the average realized in 2010s, and you can see that it was around 150 gigawatts. And the middle bar shows the assumption in the Sustainable Development Scenario of the IEA to meet the Paris Agreement objectives by 2030. And you can see that the IEA scenario requires that renewable energy generation capacity additions should more than double by 2030 to reach more than 400 gigawatts. And the purple bars above show the share of electric vehicles in total global light vehicle sales. Last year, electric vehicles represented about 8 to 9% of global light vehicle sales, with about 8 million vehicles. And IEA's sustainable development scenario assumes that the share of electric vehicles will reach about 40% by 2030, or about 40 million vehicles. That is a growth of more than 30 million vehicles to be realized in just 9 years. We do not know if these targets or assumptions will be realized, but we know that humanity's efforts towards these objectives are going to intensify and accelerate going forward. Another factor that will be resulting in an acceleration in the global transformation will be accelerating changes in preferences and social norms. The chart on this slide is an interesting one, showing that Generation Z entering their 20s in 2020s represented only about 6% of the global force in the year 2020. But their share will be increasing to more than 30% by 2030. In 2030, Generation Z, together with millennials, will represent about 75% of the global labor force. That is, new generation's role in society will be growing rapidly in the rest of 2020s, and this will probably lead to an acceleration of change in individual preferences and social norms towards responsible. Next, I'd like to spend a minute on the new emerging geopolitical order. The geopolitical order of the last 3-4 decades can be described as a unipolar world order. And during this unipolar order, we have witnessed the rise of globalism with increasing international trade and integration of markets. However, as developing countries' economic and technological capabilities grew, recently we started witnessing a retreat from globalist policies. And finally, with the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, it seems the world has officially moved to a multipolar geopolitical order. And on this slide, I try to summarize our expectations for a multipolar geopolitical world order. First, we expect to see a continued gradual retreat from globalization as nationalistic forces, protectionist policies, and pressures for back or nearshoring intensify. Second, we expect blocs or regional blocs to play an increasingly bigger role due to the ease of aligning interests and establishing standards with key allies or regional partners, and also due to security concerns. For sectors or goods that are assessed as strategic or critical, we expect to see the emergence of one world, multiple systems paradigm. And as a corollary to all these expectations, we expect the trade barriers to remain high, relatively high in between different blocks, but low for countries within the same bloc. And next, I'd like to summarize our discussion so far, our discussion on megatrends and their potential influence on the global socioeconomic and geopolitical landscape. We have argued that the green transition and technological progress are the main transformative forces of the 21st century. We have also argued that the transformation towards green and smart should accelerate going forward. And this is likely to result in rising volatility, uncertainty, and complexity in the coming years. We mentioned that major economies of the world have recognized this transformation and devising policies to govern this transformation. Particularly, we mentioned that achieving long-term economic, environmental, and social sustainability while ensuring resilience to rising volatility, uncertainty, climate change, and the multipolar world order seems to be the new vision adopted by major economies of the world. We noted that after a period of about 40 years, where the role of governments in economies gradually shrank, we have entered a new era where governments are likely to play a growing role again. Big infrastructure projects, protectionist policies, setting targets and standards for the transformation towards a new era. We have also noted that at the moment, the governments focus on decarbonization, building enabling infrastructure for the green transition, and the so-called strategic sectors and components that are the key to leadership in the new era. And lastly, we argued that we should expect to see a continued gradual retreat from globalization and rising importance of regional blocks. And with that, I'd like to move to the second section of my speech today, the influence of megatrends on urban areas and construction sector. Well, why urban areas or simply cities? On the top left section of this slide, you can see some statistics summarizing the role played by cities in the world today. Cities represent about 55% of global population and a much larger share of global economy, about 80% of global economy. Cities also represent about 3/4 of global greenhouse gas emissions and the global energy consumption. So these statistics show very clearly that the cities and our urban lives too will need to transform rapidly and dramatically if we were to meet the ambitious sustainability objectives we are facing. So what changes can we expect to see in cities? First, we expect that the governments and policymakers will aim to densify city populations around public transportation hubs so that there will be less need for transportation, especially with the use of private vehicles. This would require building new public transportation networks, as we see in Paris on this slide with the Grand Paris Express project, and also allowing for higher buildings around the transportation hubs. We also expect to see emergence of mixed-use, multifunction neighborhoods instead of only residential or only commercial neighborhoods to increase occupation efficiency of buildings and decrease the need for transportation. Secondly, we expect the energy systems, energy infrastructure of cities to go through a rapid transformation phase, from fossil to green with installation of rooftop solars, windmill farms, bioenergy projects, and so on. We expect to see energy demand in urban areas decrease despite population growth and despite continued economic growth through renovation of building stock and strict energy requirements for new buildings and encouraging active shared and public mobility. And lastly, we expect to see city officials to aim modernization and integration of different energy systems emerging in urban areas. Next, we believe that we are likely to see rapid advances in adoption of circular economy. These initiatives will be growing from a very low base, but nevertheless, we see that governments exploring different circularity strategies around the world. Materials flows for cities are being mapped out, and we see some cities announcing ambitious materials use reduction targets. For example, Amsterdam recently announced the ambition to halve its use of new raw materials by 2030. So impact of circularity might be expected to become more visible by late 2020s or early 2030s. As we mentioned, mobility systems are likely to go through a complete transformation too. Urban mobility is being transformed by encouraging public, shared and active mobility and discouraging private car use through limiting road space for driving and parking and increasing car ownership costs. And with the advent of mobility as a service concepts and autonomous vehicles, we expect cities to encourage use of shared and multimodal mobility. And we have seen the rapid growth of such services for the last decade or so. And interestingly, adoption of automated vehicles and mobility as a service concepts bring new opportunities for efficiency gains and densification in cities, such as repurposing of parking lots and garages. The photo on the bottom right part of this slide shows parking areas in a commercial district in red, and hence the big potential for repurposing of these parking areas for other uses. So how buildings might be expected to change in the future, and what will be the trends in building design? In short, we expect the buildings to get higher and also show much better performance in the future. New buildings in the future will be subject to strict energy consumption requirements, and they will also generate considerable renewable energy. We expect to see mixed-use, multifunction projects such as mixed residential office projects or residential commercial projects to gain further importance. We also expect to see new requirements such as flexibility, scalability, modularity to gain ground to meet the demand for increased efficiency and longer lifetimes from the buildings. We expect circularity requirements to grow. Circular designs that allow for reuse of components, demand for durable, recyclable, reusable products are expected to grow further. And we expect to see new circularity systems such as waste collection, water collection, and recycling systems to gain wider adoption. So, under the light of these findings or expectations on urban areas and buildings, what could be the expectations, what could be the changes we can expect to see in the construction sector? Well, construction sector is relatively slow to adopt changes, especially when compared with manufacturing sectors. It has a quite fragmented structure, and local conditions play an important role in selection of materials and construction technologies. And such factors do complicate the implementability of new technology or adoption of new materials by the sector. Nevertheless, we expect the construction sector will be going through an accelerating transformation phase during the next few decades. The sector is the biggest materials user, demolitions are the biggest source of solid waste in many major economies, and buildings are one of the biggest carbon dioxide emitting sectors. And that's why the construction sector is likely to come under growing sustainability pressures going forward. With growing sustainability pressures, we believe that digitalization and automation of construction processes are likely to gain pace. And with that, we expect to see increasing adoption of life cycle calculations, comparison of different designs with respect to their materials use, waste generation and carbon dioxide emissions performance, and choosing the designs that optimize such criteria. With digitalization and process integration, we also expect to see a growing use of prefabricated components and modular construction technologies. These changes will be significant. However, for materials, we expect steel and cement to remain as the main construction materials. The main change we expect to see in materials demand from the sector is a rapid growth in its demand for low carbon materials, mainly low carbon steel and cement. And when we turn to construction sector's steel demand in the medium term, we see two quite supportive developments. Firstly, as we mentioned before, we expect to see strong infrastructure construction activity over the next 2-3 decades, and this should support construction sector's steel demand going forward. And secondly, we believe that most of the changes and trends we explained and we expect to see in construction and building design are still positive. The expectations for buildings to become higher, flexible, and scalable, to generate considerable energy, become more efficient and smart through energy generation capacity, various materials recycling and storage systems and sensors. The expectation to see a growth in the use of prefabricated components, modularity, digitalization and industrialization of construction processes, more stringent environmental performance regulations, better understanding of materials flows and life cycle impact, focus on circularity and durability, reuse and recycling characteristics should all be supporting steel intensity thanks to steel's inherent superior characteristics for durability, reusability, and recyclability. So thanks to these developments, we expect the construction sector will be showing relatively strong growth in steel demand and grow its share further in the global total steel demand. Not only for demand, we expect the construction sector to play an increasingly bigger role also for product development and service improvements, because the sector is expected to become more digital and green, and it is going to demand greener, more durable, more usable, and more circular products. Next, how are the megatrends can be expected to shape the future of the automotive sector? Well, the automotive sector stands at the inflection point of a once-in-a-century paradigm shift. And this paradigm shift is being driven by three main waves of change. The first of these is the mobility on-demand applications that entered our lives in early 2010s, that is having the ability to use mobile phone applications to call for ride-hailing or make use of carpooling services. The second of these waves is electrification wave, which accelerated as from mid-2010s, that is replacement of the internal combustion engine technology with battery electric vehicles or other new electric vehicles. And the third wave is the autonomous vehicles wave. And this wave is expected to gain momentum as from mid-2020s and drive a rapid transformation of mobility systems and the automotive sector. The move from mobility as a product to mobility as a service is a real game changer, especially with the advent of autonomous vehicles. It has the potential to result in dramatic changes in vehicle design, vehicle demand, and bill of materials. For example, we are likely to see major changes in vehicle design from conventional designs, which prioritize driver's comfort, to new designs such as shuttles and pods that prioritize purpose of use and efficiency. What will be the impact of this great transformation on steel demand from the sector? This slide shows ID TechX global light vehicle sales projections by level of vehicle autonomy. For your information, ID TechX is a global consultancy company focused on new technologies. So what we see on these projections? First, we see that global light vehicle sales grow from around 80 million units nowadays to more than 100 million units by 2030. The growth in demand is expected to come mainly from developing countries with vast population and low motorization rates such as India. We believe that this is a reasonable expectation and bodes well for steel demand, about 100 million units of light vehicle sales or more by 2030. But this chart doesn't show how many of these sales will be electric vehicles. Let's assume that we reach the ambitious target of the IEA projection, 40% of global sales to be represented by electric vehicles by 2030. That is about 40 million electric vehicle sales by 2030. Even then, there will be about 60 million internal combustion engine vehicle sales. Moreover, we know that electrification goes faster in more premium segments. That is, most of these 60 million internal combustion engine vehicles in 2030 are likely to be in more economical segments, which are steel intensive. And when we turn to electric vehicles, let's say about 40 million vehicle sales expectations for 2030, we have observed that big selling electric vehicles with conventional designs, such as Tesla 3, have been steel intensive vehicles, and we do not expect to see a major change here. The real game changer for steel demand will be autonomous vehicles with unconventional designs. Here, the ID TechX projection is a particularly bullish one. They expect to see about 30 million level 3 autonomous vehicles, the green parts of these projections on this slide, and some level 4 robotaxi-like vehicles, which are shown by the red parts of these bars. And here we should note that many other industry experts have a more pessimistic outlook for autonomous vehicles. For example, a recent PwC projection suggested about 15 million L3 and L4 autonomous vehicle sales by 2030. So the level that autonomous vehicles are likely to reach by 2030 is debatable. However, it is clear that as from mid-2030s, we will probably be facing a growing challenge, especially with AVs with unconventional designs, and especially in the large service closures. However, steel is expected to remain the material of choice for chassis and body-in-white components for these vehicles too. To sum up, we believe that we are faced with a positive demand outlook for automotive sector steel demand till mid-2030s, but will be facing a growing challenge as from mid-2030s with the advent of autonomous vehicles with unconventional designs. And with that, let's move to the last part of my speech today, with a brief discussion on what the vision and agenda for the global steel industry should be under the light of our findings and discussions so far. So I have only one slide here, this slide. So first of all, by vision and by agenda, what we mean, let me explain that. By vision, we mean where should we aim to go in the long term, and by agenda, we mean what we should be doing now to get there, to reach our vision. And I'd like to discuss these questions for 4 parts of the global steel business: our markets, our products, smartization and digitalization of our manufacturing facilities and business processes, and decarbonization of steelmaking. First, the markets. Our vision here is, as always, growing along with the markets. We have argued that we should expect to see structural changes in global steel demand. Energy sector, for example, is expected to show strong growth in steel demand. Similarly, construction sector is expected to represent an even larger share of global steel demand, especially the demand for infrastructure projects. We have also mentioned that we might expect to see automotive sector to start showing accelerating changes in its steel demand structure going forward. And lastly, we mentioned that demand for low carbon steel might be expected to start showing strong growth, initially from low levels, but reaching significant levels quickly. And hence the agenda is to analyze such long-term trends in our own markets and devise the right investment and growth strategies for our companies. We have argued that durability, circularity, flexibility requirements should grow further going forward. We should try to appeal the market with steel's superior performance, taking these emerging material selection trends into account. Next, our products and product portfolios. Here we have mentioned important changes in construction, such as digitalization and integration of construction processes. And for automotive, we see new companies such as technology companies entering the market, and fleet owners or mobility app companies driving the change in vehicle design. Such fundamental changes require that we move towards a material solution provider, engaging with our customers, including the new players in the early design phase, and provide solutions they require. We should make sure our products are compatible with their processes that are becoming more digital and automated. This might require partnering up with our customers, as well as partnering up with different materials providers to construct multi-material solutions, such as timber steel solutions for the construction sector or polymer steel solutions for construction and automotive sectors. Digitalization and smartization of our facilities. Obviously, global steel industry will continue to invest in digitalization and smartization of its facilities and business processes. We need to carefully study emerging issues such as emergence of digital ecosystems, integration of processes, data sharing, and construct the right roadmap, investment plans, and strategies. And lastly, decarbonization of steelmaking. Here, the vision is to become a part of carbon neutral ecosystems, or rather become the material of choice for carbon neutral ecosystems. If we can combine steel's inherent superior capabilities, such as durability, flexibility, recyclability, reusability, cost, with a sensible decarbonization pathway, then we can maintain our position as the material of choice, or even improve our position. Decarbonization can only be achieved together with our partners in our value chains. From raw materials and energy supply to the usage of our products, our value chains should become gradually greener and circular. So we should come up with the right assessments, strategies, roadmaps, and establish the right communication channels for decarbonization of our value chains together with our partners. This concludes my speech today. I'd like to thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, Baris, thank you very much for this great presentation. So just as a reminder, I can believe that you already have a lot of questions. So just use the Q&A tool into Zoom if you want to ask something to Baris. Let me start with some of the questions that we have on the list. Give me just 1 minute. I am just with you. And there is one question related with the EU regulation framework. How would you comment on the yesterday EU regulation framework for the CBAM?
Well, from the Megatrends window, this is clearly a development that we expect to see. And again, from the same or by the same token, we can expect to see similar policies to be adopted by other countries or other regions of the world. So I think this would be the right comment to make from the Megatrends perspective.
Wonderful. Let's see another one. Is there a mindset conflict between urban and infrastructure development still being driven by the notion of lowest upfront cost win contract, which doesn't consistently support the requirement of both reducing the GHG emissions and the delivering the circular economy, essentially due to the weak inappropriate material selection decisions in the process.
This is a very good point. As I tried to explain in my presentation today, construction, actually the whole construction value chain is quite a laggard in changing, adopting new standards. And the industry standard has been the lowest upfront cost for the selection of the design or the contractor. But in my speech, I wanted to argue that this should be expected to change. Maybe slowly in the beginning, but should definitely be accelerating in the coming years. As I've said, especially with the growing ability to quantify the performance of different designs, different contractors with respect to materials use, with respect to life cycle calculations, with respect to carbon dioxide emissions. We should see the popularity of this approach to grow going forward. And with that, with this growing ability, the adoption of these methods should grow. And with that, the selection criteria, we should see that such selection criteria changing going forward.
Okay, great. We are getting more and more questions. Give me just one sec. And can you advise on the mega trends on use of alloys and coating to enhance the durability of the material?
This is a difficult one for me. I cannot give lots of specific examples, but what we are seeing is a significant growth or increase in interest for durability, for the products to be more durable, especially in construction. This also has an angle towards reuse of the products or components used in construction after the useful lifetime of a building is reached. And definitely the suppliers of the construction industry will be looking into increasing the durability of their products. And one way of doing that is actually using alloys and coatings or providing some multi-material solutions. So what we see is that, to increase the performance, to increase the durability of the products, actually this is supporting the use of alloys or coatings or some multi-material kind of solutions in construction.
Wonderful. Let's jump to the next one. And do you think and believe that the green steel technology would be realized globally? And how about the raw material cost for the steel industry? Will increase or decrease?
I think eventually, yes, green steel technology, not the same technology, but probably a technology portfolio will be emerging in different parts of the world. I believe that we are in the initial phases of this transformation for the steel industry, and I expect the discussion to change, to mature going forward. We already see several, let's say, projections or expectations or modeling attempts for the global steel industry. Let's say what kind of a steel making capacity structure we might see in 2050. A structure which meets the, let's say, the sustainable development scenario projection I presented from the International Energy Agency, or a steelmaking capacity structure which meets carbon neutrality. So we have a few models on that and their results, and we see that when compared with, let's say, 2-3 years ago, the recent models are much more richer. They consider different. They've already started considering different technologies or different possibilities, and I just expect this to get more richer. So as we study this topic, as our efforts towards decarbonization of steel making intensify, we will be seeing different approaches, different technologies being considered and deployed in different parts of the world. And how about the raw material costs? Here, I can only say that we shouldn't think about the future by considering the current conditions. or I can take a different position here. For example, we know that this is going to be a very this is the biggest challenge the whole humanity faced, right? All these investments, first of all, we need to develop breakthrough technologies and then deploy them at a very rapid pace. So how can such a challenge be realized? When you talk to people who believe that this is possible, their main argument is the experience from the renewable energy sector. So how fast the technology progressed and how quickly the costs, renewable energy costs declined. So certainly they expect to see such a decline in hydrogen costs, for example. So we shouldn't assume that, or if these people are right, we shouldn't assume that the current hydrogen cost will be the case in 2040s or 2050s. So the calculation in the future will probably be much different. So I also see such a possibility, but I also think that the renewable energy generation technology, when compared with steel making technology, might be a bit simpler, and that's why we might not be able to realize such rapid progress in technology or such rapid decline in costs. But anyway, these are, no one knows. And another thing I can tell about raw material costs from Megatrends perspective is that, so as I mentioned, this is a value chain challenge. Certainly, our raw material suppliers are also putting lots of efforts to decarbonize their operations, and on top of that, provide greener products to the steel industry. But these efforts have certain costs, which mean that decarbonization is likely to lead to an increase in the cost base, not only for the steel industry, but for all industries and for everyone, actually.
Okay, and in order to see, I mean, the mega trend is looking for a long-term trend, but here we have a question: what will be the most important trend to watch in the 2023 for the steel decarbonization? So what do you think that will happen during the 2023?
We've seen that regulations play a very important role. So in this sense, the regulations coming from especially the major economies of the world are certainly very important. So what are the objectives set by policymakers? The let's say economy-wide objectives, such as carbon neutrality for a certain country to be achieved at a certain year. So these are very important macro policies, and we are also seeing sector level policies are also being devised and announced. So I think policies, regulations, objectives set by governments in different parts of the world are certainly important trends to watch in steel industry's decarbonization. CBAM and its likely impact. So the signature of the CBAM yesterday, certainly it might be expected to speed up some processes in some other countries which are integrated or which have a lot of business with the European economies, such as Turkey. So I think particularly for 2023, we can mention these. And another near-term important trend or observation could be how the development of breakthrough technologies progress, for example, on hydrogen steelmaking front. What are the results we will be seeing, and also on carbon capture, what kind of results we will be seeing in 2023 and in the following years will be important to watch, of course.
Okay, and let me ask you one more question. And construction sector seemed to be slower than automotive sector in procuring lower emission steel because the sector has lower margin and is therefore more sensitive to higher costs of the green steel. And when do you think or expect this will change, and how to best incentive the construction sector to use green steel?
I'm not sure if this is really fair to say construction has been slower than the automotive sector. As I said, regulations matter a lot. And certainly energy sector is the leader in green transition. And then the policymakers focused on mobility and automotive. So this is also a demand coming from policymakers, but we see similar demands are also coming for the construction sector in terms of new energy use requirements for the new buildings, for example. We see different countries also exploring different approaches, such as requirements to use a certain construction technology, such as more modular construction. So in some regulations, we observe these kind of new demands emerging, or use of certain materials such as recyclable materials and so on. So certainly regulations do matter a lot in this process. But in terms of the demand for green steel or low carbon steel, we also see some major construction companies announcing ambitious targets such as low carbon materials use. They are announcing targets such as we aim to reach this percentage of low carbon materials used by 2030, by 2035, which is a very similar observation to the major OEMs. So in addition to decarbonization of their operations or reaching a certain share for their fleets for electric vehicles, some of the OEMs have also announced reaching a certain share for the low carbon materials use in their manufacturing, in their operations. So what I mean is certainly the focus is on decarbonizing their own operations and their products. But as their operations are carbonized, as let's say automotive industry provides more electric vehicles, then the focus moves on the embedded carbon. And then, you know, the demand for low carbon materials to decrease the embedded carbon in their products should just grow. And I think construction might not necessarily be slower than automotive, well, at least in some countries in this process.
Okay, and we are approaching to the time of the end of the webinar. Let me just jump to one more question. And how do you expect the current EU energy crisis impact the steel industry? And will it lead to the deindustrialization in Europe and the outflow of capacity to US or Asia, for instance?
It's too early to say. What we can say with a good level of certainty is that this has boosted Europe's efforts to develop renewable energy capacity, and also boosted the region's efforts to increase the energy efficiency. So I think these will just remain, so these policies just remain and actually intensify going forward. So I think these processes have been accelerated by the energy crisis. But I think it's too soon to say what the impact will be on the region's manufacturing structure. We know that the impact on certain sectors such as chemicals, fertilizers, aluminium has been quite considerable. But as I said, it is too early to say if the idled capacity will be coming back, when they will be coming back, and so on. But again, from Megatrends perspective, we don't really see the industrialization as the, let's say, vision for major economies of the world. To the contrary, we see an industrialization as the vision, back or near shoring as far as possible, or where necessary, especially for the sectors and goods which are considered as strategic, as I tried to explain in my speech. Will be the vision and the agenda for the major economies of the world. So certainly for some sectors, we shouldn't expect any deindustrialization, but further growing capacity, establishing capacity. But for some other industries, yeah, maybe yes.
Okay, Baris, thank you very much. I join to the many thanks from all the attendees to you for the great presentation and all this information that I believe that will be very useful for the work that is coming forward. And just a reminder for the audience, and this webinar has been recorded, will be available in steeluniversity.org next week. And also, if you want to integrate this webinar and information into your companies or universities, just contact us to support@steeluniversity.org, and we will be happy to support this integration. And with that, Baris, thank you very much again, and have a great day.